This is the Invisible Man. I'm here with Miss Ida Hakeem. She's been known as Pharaoh's daughter. She is a modern day abolitionist and, most importantly, a human rights advocate. And we're visiting with her for memories. She's going to give us some information about what she has done. And I'm not sure if she'll even tell us why, but we hope so. She has been very active in the reparations movement, and we just want the world to know. Ms. Hakeem, where would you like to begin?
Well, thank you. I'll begin here. I was just thinking, why am I doing what I'm doing is a good question. And it goes back to my childhood. I was raised on a farm, a very, very comfortable, beautiful childhood. My father was a preacher, and I was very, very much into the Bible stories, and I was especially interested in the book of Revelation. I remember reading that book at night. I was only about 9 years old, and I found that story to be so fascinating. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to be deceived by the Antichrist. And I also thought, if I ever get to meet the Son of Man, I will never, ever fail him. So that went in my heart when I was just a little girl. And the Bible stories were the stories in my head. And so I came from a background where my father was a very moral man, and my mother was a beautiful lady. And they put a spiritual core into me, or I was born with a spiritual core. My desire in life was to find out what God is, who God is, and how I could serve God. That's it. That's what motivated me. So we're going to skip ahead to when I was in Los Angeles, trying to find my way, trying to find who am I and what am I doing here and what is the truth. I studied the Eastern religions and pretty much got into whatever I could to try to understand. And I was trying to make it as a songwriter and singer. And I had some success. But one day I took all these 16-track tapes that I had accumulated, and I walked over to a garbage can and I dumped them in. I said, this is not it. This is not working. And I went through a time period where I didn't know what to do. And right there on Venice Beach, I saw Khaled Hakeem training a brother named Angel in the martial arts. And I thought, well, maybe I can just stay alive by doing the martial arts, maybe that will help me. So I signed up for classes and went to the classes once a week. I was working as a secretary in synagogue right down the street, Mishkan Tefillo it was called. I was the secretary to the rabbi. And so I went to my classes, and after a few months, Khaled started walking me home, and I found his mind to be so interesting, really interesting. A lot of conversation that I hadn't had before. And we would sit at the table in my apartment and talk for hours on end. And he brought the book, The Fall of America, by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That was a shock. And that really impacted my consciousness. And I actually had a vision where I saw puzzle pieces coming together. It's like, wow, this might explain some of the questions that I have. So Khaled and I got together, and he wanted to move to Chicago and join. He had been a member of the Nation of Islam when the messenger was alive. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad was alive. He was a member. He told me he was at the very last Savior's Day. It was quite impactful. And he wanted to be around the brothers again. And so we moved to Chicago, and he attended, we listened to a lot of the messenger's tapes. I was very familiar with what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was teaching. And he brought home some audio tapes of Minister Louis Farrakhan, and I listened to those. And a couple of brothers, I found a picture of one of them in here. His name is Rashad. Rashad and Jamal Shamsuddin, Rashad Mitchell, Jamal Shamsuddin, were friends of Khaled, and they brought by the Muhammad Speaks newspaper with the picture of Queen Mishaki Muhammad on the cover. And I read that paper, and I thought, that was very interesting. I was impressed by it. It had a lot of good information in there. And brought audio tapes of Silas Muhammad. And we started listening to Silas Muhammad, and he sounded so much like the messenger. And, so I kind of got into listening to those tapes and hearing what he had to teach. And I decided at some point that I needed to write to Silas Muhammad, and because I didn't want to be harmful to Khaled, I didn't want to keep him out of the nation. I didn't want him to be ostracized because he had a relationship with a white woman and mixed children. And so I wrote to Mr. Muhammad, and it must have been several months later, because we had relocated by that time to Santa Fe, New Mexico. We were living in New Mexico. And the Muhammad Speaks newspaper arrived in the mail, and in the centerfold of the paper was a response from Mr. Muhammad to my letter asking him what could I do. And he told me that I could support him in his efforts to obtain reparations for African Americans. At that point, they were called African Americans. So I thought, wow, white people are going to kill me for this. And I agreed to do it. I will support reparations. I'll see what I can find out about it. And we attended a conference in Washington, D.C., where I met Queen Mother Dorothy Lewis, and she gave me information on reparations. So this was about 85, 86, around those years. And at that point in time, Mrs. Muhammad, who's also known as Attorney Harriet Abu Bakr, Attorney Abu Bakr, along with some other attorneys, had organized the National Commission for Reparations. So I studied what they were doing. They were approaching the United Nations with the 1503 petition. And the organization that was helping them was called IRAM, the International Human Rights Association of American Minorities. Dr. Cly was the head of that organization. And I think that it was, I'm not entirely sure, I think Mrs. Muhammad went a couple of times to Geneva, and they did deliver the 1503 petition, which is a communication between a people and a government. It's only meant for the government to see. And so those things were going on. And in 1992, Mr. Muhammad asked me to organize an NGO, to organize a consultative NGO. That was a big challenge because a consultative NGO has to publish materials. It has to be, has to be quite a large organization to become a consultative NGO. Consultative means that you could speak at the conferences, that you have the ability to intervene verbally. So I organized nonprofit I called it Caucasians United for Reparations and Emancipation. And the reason I went in that direction is because you can't create an NGO to represent a section of civil society that already has representation. And Iran already existed, so I had to create something that didn't exist. And that was an organization of white people who support and advocate reparations for descendants of enslaved Africans. I created the NGO, or I created the nonprofit, and we started publishing books. We did a book called Reparations, The Cure for America's Race Problem. And we did another book called, and by saying we, I mean myself and a few other members of CURE, Donna Lamb, Pharrell Winfrey, Larry Yates, Daniel Warren, other members of CURE helped to write the books. And I did a lot of television shows, and I did a lot of radio, and I have some photographs here that reminded me of that, of the radio shows that I did.
In 1992, at the recommendation of Mr. Silas Muhammad, Ida undertook to create an organization of white supporters and gain consultative NGO status for that organization at the UN. Ida created CURE, C-U-R-E, Caucasians United for Reparations and Emancipation. The organization's members wrote and published 2 books, Reparations, The Cure for America's Race Problem, and The Debtors, Whites Respond to the Call for Black Reparations. Ida was invited on a number of national radio and television shows to talk about the books and white people in support of reparations. CURE gained NGO, non-governmental organization status in 1997, and from 1997 to 2006, Ida facilitated the spoken and written interventions of Mr. Silas Muhammad and his wife, attorney Harriet Abu Bakr, as well as a number of other black leaders. Over a period of 9 years, leaders spoke before UN bodies nearly 30 times in Geneva, Switzerland, and elsewhere.
And gradually the membership of CURE grew to where we had 120 members, and we had published quite a lot of material. We had board of directors, we had our meetings, so we pretty much fulfilled all of the requirements for a consultative NGO. We were considered by the UN in New York in 1997. I went there for that meeting, and Maya Hadi went with me. She'll recall that. And we sat there and we listened to, they asked questions, I answered them, and they granted the consultative status to CURE. So we had what we were looking for. And 97, we submitted the first communication to the UN, and that was there was a written statement by Mr. Muhammad, and the written statement, he brought their attention to the plight of the descendants of enslaved Africans in the U.S. We were almost immediately invited to attend in Geneva, the Working Group on Minorities. And I have some photographs of that. I'll go through these pictures in a little bit, and we'll talk about the different meetings. But we went to the Working Group on Minorities, and it was at this working group that Mr. Muhammad, he was shocked. He was shocked to the core to find out that the United Nations had never given any thought or any consideration to the descendants of enslaved Africans throughout the diaspora. They did not exist in the mind of the UN. There was no consideration of them whatsoever. Mr. Muhammad asked the experts to organize a forum so that the leaders in various countries, in Colombia and Brazil and Honduras and many other different countries, and 19 different countries in South and Central America, could come together and discuss their identity, because this was a human family. It is a human family with no recognition. In Geneva, after that first meeting, we went downtown in Geneva to a store. It was a store with a cafeteria, and we sat down in the cafeteria, and Mr. Muhammad said, "You know, we don't exist according to the UN. We do not exist. We are zero." And he actually wept. And I wanted to comfort him somehow. And I said, well, zero is a place to begin. And that was the beginning. In pointing out what was achieved at the United Nations, what was achieved was a human family coming to life. At the forums that took place, the United Nations organized forums for Afro-descendants. They organized one in Honduras, and organized one in La Ceiba, Honduras, and one in Chincha, Peru. And at these forums, the leaders of the descendants agreed to be known as Afro-descendants, and Mr. and Mrs. Muhammad wrote a definition that defines Afro-descendants as people whose identity was completely destroyed. Identity, language, culture, religion, everything that a human family cherishes was destroyed in slavery. And the Working Group on Minorities had a focus on one particular covenant. The working groups are organized around covenants and around laws. Covenant is Article 27 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It says that national minorities have the right to their language, their culture, their religion, and their identity. And this right was utterly destroyed. So that was the law that we approached the UN under, and it was the law under which Afro-descendants were recognized by the United Nations. Let's see. Let's look at some pictures here. We can go back. I see one. World Conference Against Racism. Here. We have Mr. Muhammad, Mrs. Muhammad, and I were seated along the side. It was the final meeting where all of the countries were there and all of the advocates were there. And Mr. Muhammad spoke at this meeting. It was in 2001. And as he did, he asked for a forum. Once again, he asked for a forum and for recognition. And at these forums, let's see, we have pictures from the forums as well. We had a forum in Honduras, this one. This beautiful lady was from Honduras. I wish I could remember her name. She was with us in Geneva and with us in Honduras. And I can't call her name back to my mind. I'm sorry about that. But here I am with her in, I believe that this one was taken I believe it was taken in Chincha, Peru. She was there for that as well. So, okay, we can talk about Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh's daughter is known as the one who brought to the attention of Pharaoh the condition of the individuals who were descendants of slaves or who were enslaved. So that's the relationship with Pharaoh's daughter. And I'm happy to be a person who did that. It makes me proud. I'm glad I was able to do that for Afro-descendants. And I really would like to talk, I'd like to talk to Americans and white Americans about reparations. We have on our shoulders an awful legacy. It really is. It's a legacy of colonization and enslavement. 400 years of slavery. Well, slavery and the after effects of slavery, Jim Crow and all of the different things that were done to try to hold black people down and keep them from obtaining their rights to live a decent life. And I want us to, Americans, to realize that we can lift this legacy off of our shoulders by paying reparations. And so can the other countries that were involved. We had France and England and Denmark. A number of different European countries transported slaves and colonized the Americas. And this is a crime that benefited us financially. It set America up to be wealthy, a wealthy country. And how can we just wave it away and say, well, that's okay. Everything is good for Afro-descendants now, so, we don't need to come up with any land or money or and so forth. And that's not the case. What goes around comes around. I don't like to bring something to your attention through creating fear, but what goes around comes around. This America is America is going to fall. And if we don't come around and pay attention to the wrongs that have been done, I'm afraid it'll be a devastating fall. I want European Americans to come to the realization that such a thing cannot be done without consequences. And I want us to pay reparations. I want the Roman Catholic Church to pay reparations. I want the various companies and educational institutions involved to pay reparations. And I want the wars to come to an end. We need a new world. We need a world that is founded upon righteousness and not upon evil. I would like to see that as a world founded upon doing right by our brothers and sisters. So anyway, that's it in a nutshell. And we can go through some of these pictures now and have a look at the story as it unfolded. I have a whole stack of photographs from the United Nations. We visited the UN 3 times a year from 1998 to 2006. We made a huge amount of progress to actually bring a human family into global recognition. This family that had not been recognized at all as even existing came from zero to being recognized as Afro-descendants and being defined and identified. So Afro-descendants do exist now on the global scene. They do exist. Afro-descendant leaders can petition the UN for reparations. That's where the reparations demand needs to go, to the United Nations on behalf of all Afro-descendants. There are a lot of different governments involved in the practice of transporting slaves and enslavement, and these governments can stop spending money on war and start to spend it on making amends for what was done. Imagine a world where we actually are able to make amends for what was done and live in peace and harmony with each other. It's a beautiful thought. Okay, let's have a look at our pictures. Aha. This is our very first meeting, a working group on minorities, the very first meeting. I don't know if you can see that. That's kind of small images there.
Well, if I zoom in, then I'll have to zoom back out.
Okay, well, let's not do it.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we can just
now,
look at it.
what year was that?
That was 1998.
1998.
Yeah, that was 1998. I'm looking at a picture now of me doing a radio show in Chicago, WLS. I did a lot of television and radio when I was building the organization CURE. That's how we went from 5 or 6 members to 120.
And remind us again what CURE stands for.
Caucasians United for Reparations and Emancipation, CURE.
Was that something strange for you to come up with a name like that? How did that name come about?
Isn't that interesting? I was thinking, I had to create an NGO that represents a portion of civil society that had not been represented. That's the only thing I could think of. And then the acronym, of course, is very good, CURE. So that's why I chose the name. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And we did at the UN. It was, I think, about the year 2000, and at the it was at either the subcommission or the Commission on Human Rights, and they introduced Mr. Muhammad as being brought there by Caucasians United for Reparations and Emancipation, and I felt so uncomfortable. I thought, no, I don't like him introduced like that. So we went through the process of changing the name of the NGO to All for Reparations and Emancipation, AFRE. So that took place around the year 2000.
Now, does that still exist?
Yes,
organization?
Okay. Yeah, AFRE is a United Nations NGO in good standing and able to take the reparations case to the UN. Once, what would be ideal and what I think is going to come to pass is that black leaders will come together under the demand for reparations. They'll come together. There are so many minds. And, it's apparent the damage that was done through slavery and the destruction of identity, and seeing how many different attempts there have been among Afro-descendants to identify who we are. It's decades worth of pain and suffering to try to find out who are we, where did we come from, what is our history. It was destroyed. When you destroy people's identity, you destroy their humanity. So the people not only had their identity destroyed, they were told that they were nothing but slaves and destined to be that for forever. And that damage is still apparent, and it still exists in the black community. And you can't say that the lingering effects of slavery are all gone, because they're not. Not all gone. There still is a lot to do, and there are lots of really wonderful black leaders working with the youth and working to bring life into the community, and it will take place. You know, the damages will be, their reparations will be a very good step in recovering from the damages that were perpetrated upon the people through enslavement.
Could you talk a little bit about how difficult it was to gain entry into the UN?
It was a challenge. It was a challenge because that I read what is required in order to get consultative status. What's required? We have to have published materials. We have to have our meetings and conferences. We have to have our board of directors. The organization has to show that it is a group in civil society that has a reason to want to speak to the UN. And that's, for that reason we wrote the books. And for that reason, for gaining membership, I went on TV and radio a whole lot. I actually, if you Google Tony Brown's Journal and reparations, you can see a few minutes of the interview that Tony Brown's Journal did. It was far longer than what's available online right now, but I was there on Tony Brown's Journal and a lot of different shows, and a lot of radio shows, and I was there promoting the books.